Worries, it's okay now. The sun is here to stay. Blue skies, feel the wind beneath you as you fly by. Dancing on a cloud, it lifts you high, high, high. Your troubles blow.
Well, hello, everybody. So listen, as technologically savvy as we all are, I want you to take a look on the side of your screen. You got a box that says, tab says chat, questions, polls. And in the chat box, if you can hear me, type, hey, we can hear you. That'd be great. Hey, oh, there's Pam. Okay. And Pam is sitting right next to me, so that, that didn't count. Hey, guys. Hi, Allison. I'm so glad that you're here. I'm going to go through this information. We've discovered the chat tab here, and I want you to take a look at the poll tab as well. There's a poll in there right now. Who do you fly in support of? And just give us some feedback. God, it's so great to see all you guys here. Anybody taken one of my webinars before? Oh, James says, I have no audio yet. James, click the video of me and turn on. Okay, well, I'm so glad that you're all here. So today we're talking about Train the Trainer. This is a class that is designed so that you can create your own visual observer class. It's very easy once we go over this information. I'm going to move steadily through it. At the end, you'll have an opportunity to get your continuing education credits if you are a North Carolina public safety person, and also you're going to take an online test, and so you can print out a super snazzy certificate and show your supervisor that you actually did something. Oh, James says it's on. You're awesome, James. All right, my name's Steve Rode. I'm the Chief Pilot for the Wake Forest Fire Department. I'm the on-call pilot for North Carolina Emergency Management. I am something else, so I'm an FAA certificated instrument-rated airplane pilot, and I'm the chief pilot for the North Carolina Public Safety Drone Academy. I also run the website psflight.org. If you have not been to that website yet, I publish a lot of information there. I had an emergency flight last Friday, and I published the flight debrief there for that flight, and you can subscribe to updates there on the site. If you haven't been there yet, go do that. All right, here is my general disclaimer. I am not the holder of all truth, and what you're about to hear is the result of my education and experience on the subject. I encourage you all to constantly pursue learning and education along your journey, and most importantly, to get out there and fly and test and see what works best for you. Look, I always reserve the right to be wrong, but I diligently try not to be. We've covered the chat tab. There's a questions tab. If you have something you want to ask that's a little bit longer than a chat, you can type it in there, and Pam will give me the hey you message. and tell me about the question, and we'll get to it. So questions are always welcome. The polls tab, let's see. Go to the polls tab and take that poll that's, it says draft. Okay, that's why you can't do it. There we go. Now it's published. Go to the polls tab, vote. Let me know if you're law enforcement, fire department, emergency management, or some other animal. There we go, law enforcement. Law enforcement. Hey, speaking of law enforcement, I've got, okay. For all my law enforcement friends out there, today I went and we flew this test drone on a SWAT mission, and this thing is awesome. I'm going to be writing a review about it for AOPA. And if you don't subscribe to their drone publication, AOPA.org, drone, I don't know what the section's called, but they have lots of good articles out, especially for public safety there. That little drone was cheap and amazing. So here's the class outline. The goal of this class is to give you enough information to develop your own internal UAS visual observer training program. It will be super simple. I'm going to give you everything you need. By the end of the class, you'll have a general idea of what the class needs to cover. And as I said, I'm going to give you all the material that you need. If you're attending this class live, ask questions. If you are registered for this class, you can always go back and replay the class if you want. You just can't ask questions because we'll all be asleep. You can download the files. We're going to give you links and stuff of PDF files and links of websites for you to access. Right-click on the link of the file, and you can save it to your desktop, and you'll have it forever there. And I mentioned continuing education credits are going to be available for North Carolina-based public safety folks. So here's a whole list of class downloads that you're going to get. Save them to your computer. All right, let's get to the meat of this thing. The FAA is the ultimate authority of who to trust when it comes to specific information. Everything that I'm going to give you, you're going to see, comes from the FAA. Take myth, common perception, things you might hear from friends, and verify everything that you might hear. The FAA is the only authority. They create the rules. They are going to have a bigger emphasis on enforcement this year. And I would not be surprised for any public safety agency to get a surprise visit from the FAA and ask to see documentation about your visual observer training. So let's get some facts straight. My opinion is public safety pilots should fly as Part 107 certificated pilots for maximum flexibility and easier compliance with the regulations. Under Part 107 of the FAR, the Federal Aviation Regulations, a UAS pilot is not required to have a visual observer to fly. As a Part 107 pilot is required to have a VO if they're using goggles, first-person view goggles. Departments and pilots flying under a COA will find that their COA most likely says that they need to fly with a VO every time that they fly. The VO is supposed to help tell the pilot that the area is void of aerial traffic and possible intrusions. All pilots need luck to guarantee there are no safety risks, since safety risks are typically unseen until it's too late. Having a VO can be extremely helpful. A VO may not be required if you hold a beyond visual line of sight waiver, but those are very hard to get, and you're just not going to get one for day-to-day operations at this time. So this is what the FAA says the role of the VO is. Hey, we got our first download too. Although a primary responsibility of the visual observer is to scan for traffic, and I agree with them on this, there are other potential uses for the visual observers, even in operations where conflicting traffic is not anticipated. Visual observers can be used to assist the UAS pilot in avoiding hard-to-detect obstacles such as power lines, guy wires, and antennas, and they can also be used to monitor ground traffic, both people and vehicles, so the UAS pilot can maneuver away from them to protect them in the event of an unexpected failure of the aircraft. The need for any or all of these functions will be dependent on the particular operation. And Pam just posted the link to that below. Pam, there's a, if you could repost that without the third slash in there. That'll be the full link. Okay, so here's what I have to say about visual observers. I agree with the FAA totally that there's a secondary role for the visual observers, and that is to keep people off your back as a pilot when you are flying. Visual observer can be a real public relations advantage and being polite to people, because when I'm flying by myself and there's no VO around and I'm on a mission flight, I am polite but firm about don't bug me. And I'll be happy to answer all your questions once I'm on the ground. So a VO can also just be there to help manage communications, and they don't have to solely rely on visually looking at the aircraft to have a true benefit. So everything that we do with our departments and our flights is all governed by this book. I've got to get the new one, but you can see that my copy is well tabbed and marked. This is the Federal Aviation Regulations book about all the things that apply to us and we have to pay attention to. And you can either buy a paper copy. Personally, I like the paper copy. I'm just old like that. But you can also access the FAR, Federal Aviation Regulations, online, and Pam just sent that link through. The Cornell, the law, cornell.edu website, it's one of my favorite ones for searching regulations. It's easy to use and very user-friendly. I think that you should always, if you're teaching something at a department or an agency, you should always have a copy of the FAR AIM on hand. It is the document the FAA expects you to know. And always go and research whatever you can through that Cornell website. Here are the most important sections for your class. And if you are flying as a COA pilot under a public aircraft operation, these first two sections are going to be the gotchas from the FAA. You may not be required to comply with Part 107, but all pilots, Part 107 and COA pilots, have to comply with FAR Section 91.3, responsibility and authority of the pilot in command, the PIC. 91.13, careless or reckless operation. That's the one that's always going to nail you. 107.19, we're going to talk about definitions, visual line of sight, visual observer, and 107.35, the operation of multiple small unmanned aircraft. Okay, here's what 91.3 says that you need to pay careful attention to. I don't care if you are flying for a department and you think you're covered by the department, the county, the state, or whatever when it comes to liability. If you are flying an aircraft for a commercial reason under Part 107 or under a COA, you are subject to FAR 91.3. The pilot in command of an aircraft is directly responsible for and is the final authority as to the operation of that aircraft. You are personally responsible, on top of everybody else, personally liable for your actions as the PIC. FAR 91.13 is the one that catches everybody. If you do something that's outside the regulations accidentally or you make a poor decision, then 91.13, no person may operate an aircraft in a careless or reckless manner so as to endanger the life or property of another. Now, these are specific to Part 107 pilots. 107.3, a small UAS, a drone, or the aircraft that we fly, means a small unmanned aircraft and its associated elements, including communication links and the components that control the small unmanned aircraft, the controller, that are required for safe and efficient operation of the aircraft in the national airspace. And we also call that NAS. You know, the FAA, I guess any government agency, is real big on abbreviations. So as we move through here, might hear me say NAS instead of National Airspace, or PIC instead of Pilot in Command. The VO means a person who is designated by the remote pilot in command to assist the remote pilot in command and the person manipulating the flight controls of the small UAS to see and avoid other air traffic or objects aloft or on the ground. Here's what the definition of a visual observer is. They must meet all of the following requirements. The remote PIC, the person manipulating the controls, and the VO must maintain effective communications with each other at all times. This is another gotcha. So the FAA says you can't be on a regular incident radio, you know, the kinds that we use in police and fire, but you have to maintain full two-way communications. So that's full duplex communications, meaning that you have to be able to talk and hear at the same time. An example is a good difference is the radios that we use, we can't talk and hear at the same time, but if you're on a cell phone, you can talk and hear at the same time. So if you have a VO that is not directly standing where the PIC can communicate with them, they have to be on a duplex communication device. The remote pilot command must ensure that the visual observer is able to see the unmanned aircraft in the manner specified in 107.31. The remote pilot in command, the person manipulating flight controls, and the VO must coordinate to do the following: scan the airspace where the small aircraft is operating for any potential collision or hazard, and maintain awareness of the position of the small aircraft through direct visual observation. You have to see it. You cannot use binoculars or something else like that. You have to visually see it. You can have corrected vision, wearing glasses or contact lenses. If you look through any visual device, it can only be a glance. You're supposed to see it at all times. Now, what the rules say and what we face on a regular basis are oftentimes very different. At 3 a.m. on a dark, cold night with two missing 11-year-old girls in the woods, the minute you take off, you lose sight of it. And as the pilot, you have to bear full responsibility for breaking those laws or rules.
We have a question.
All right, John asked a question. So you cannot use public safety radios, must be a cell phone. So John, even if you look at the latest Part 107 waivers for like night operations, or it's always funny, to fly at night, you need a daytime waiver. So you will see that it says two-way communications. And further research says that it has to be duplex, with the ability to talk and receive at the same time. So the answer is technically no. You cannot use a public safety radio like we use. Has to be duplex. 107.31, this is what visual line of sight is. With vision that is unaided by any device, I just mentioned that, other than corrective lenses, the PIC and the VO must be able to see the unmanned aircraft through the entire flight to know the unmanned aircraft's location, determine the altitude, attitude, and direction of flight, observe the airspace for other traffic or hazards, and determine that the unmanned aircraft does not endanger the life or property of another. Throughout the entire flight of the drone, the ability described in paragraph A of this section must be exercised by either the PIC, the person manipulating the controls under the authority of the PIC, or the visual observer. So onboard cameras is no. So here's the problem. There is a huge discrepancy between what we do or may do or what others tell you and what the regulations are. Being an airplane pilot since 1988, the FAA has always been an agency that's based on safety and trying to keep people from killing themselves and doing bad things. But the agency has always moved slowly and deliberatively. The whole drone thing is light years and moves so fast that moves so fast that the FAA just can't keep up. So what we're doing, what our equipment allows us to do, far exceeds what the regulations say we can do. You may do that. You may fly and not see it. Your visual observer might lose sight of it. All of these things. You may not always fly where you can visually see it unaided by any device. But that is on the PIC. That is on the pilot. And if anything happens, the FAA can turn from being the friendly agency to the agency with lots of teeth and lawyers and everything else. Okay, here's more sources of material for your class. The Pilot's Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge, which Pam is posting the link to right now, is chapter 17, contains information that will give you bonus points with the FAA. If you look at any of the waivers, daytime waivers, flight over people, anything like that, you will see that the requirements for training for people under that waiver, usually include visual illusions, optical illusions, vision types, blind spots, night vision, and distance estimation factors. So we're giving you 2 links. One is the link to the entire Pilot's Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge, because there's lots of good reference material in that. And the second link is just for Chapter 17. If you're talking about night visual observer training, you're going to want to know about, the FAA loves to talk about all of the night visual illusions, vision deficiencies, confusion with ground lights, all this stuff. And we're going to be sending you the Helicopter Flying Handbook and also Chapter 13, night operations of that. These 2 chapters that you're getting right now will make it so easy for you to build your visual observer class. It's going to be copy and paste for you. So if you will apply for a waiver or a COA, expect to have to address these questions in your application. What kind of training, if any, will your visual observers have prior to flying under the waiver? So the if any is a trick question. So you're going to have to give them training. How will they be trained? How will the responsible person know that the personnel are competent and have operational knowledge to fly safely under the waiver? And you, as the program person, the program director, the teacher, or whatever, you will be the responsible person. You can apply for a Part 107 waiver for your department, but if whoever the person is that applies is the responsible person for the whole department. So Part 107 can cover all your pilots. You have to have a responsible person. If personnel will be tested, which you should, I give up. The FAA wins. You should test everybody and you should keep a record of it. They want to know what kind of testing will be performed and how will evaluations be conducted and documented. Through this class, at the end, you're going to be able to log on, take an online test, and it'll show you an example of an online test. You can just print them out. You can have your own printout and take a test. You can score them manually and keep them on file. That's perfectly fine. How will personnel maintain the knowledge skill to fly under this waiver? Will recurrent training or testing be required? The answer to that is yes. So you'll have to give them the class again. And you can apply for a 107.33 waiver, use a visual observer without following all of the requirements. But the granted waivers that I have seen, and you can go onto the FAA website and search 107 waivers, and you will see that 107.33 waivers have such limiting requirements, it's just not even worth applying for it. So here's the training recommendations. Visual observers should be aware of cardinal directions when standing within an area of operation. Which way is north, south, east, west? They should be trained to maintain a scanning pattern so that the complete scanning of the area is accomplished. Look, quite frankly, as a pilot on emergency scenes, my biggest problem is not getting the visual observer to know which way is north, south, east, west, or to scan the sky. My biggest problem is to get him to stop talking to his friends he hasn't seen in a long time and focus on the mission at hand. It's easy to get distracted. We're going to talk about scanning. There should be a common set of terms for all crew members, like landmarks. That building is the Founders Building, or that's the mill, or that's Bay Street Bridge. And visual observers should be aware of the location of airports and flight corridors relative to their positions. Now, here are the FAA visual observer medical recommendations. You don't see this anywhere. Visual observers must have distance acuity of 20/20 or better with or without corrective lenses, normal color vision, normal hearing acuity, no drug usage. And here is the next thing about alcohol. Observers should be counseled regarding alcohol consumption. Alcohol usage has been shown to cause visual complications. You might have heard that you can't have any alcohol, you can't have consumed alcohol within 8 hours of flying, and that is true. But it's not about having one beer or one shot or anything else. The FAA regulation is you cannot have consumed any, not one sip, within 8 hours of acting as a visual observer. If visual observers are used for night operations, a 30-minute time period is required before they are considered fully adapted to the dark. On a public safety scene where we got all sorts of flashing lights, that's an impossible task. And we got a download for you here, the operational approval from the FAA for UAS operations. A VO must be positioned to assess the PIC to exercise the see and avoid responsibilities. So as the pilot in command, I will oftentimes tell the VO, I want you to stand there, or I want you to be here. The PIC is the sole and final authority to the operation of the aircraft, and it is also the PIC's responsibility to designate where the VO should stand or be located. Because the field of view and distortion issues with aids division, such as binoculars, field glasses, night vision devices, telephoto lenses, these are only allowed for augmentation of the visual capability. They cannot be used as the primary means of visual contact. So this means, as I said, if you need to look through a set of binoculars, you can do it, but you cannot rely on them to see the aircraft. The responsibility of ensuring the safe flight and adequate visual range coverage to avoid any collisions remains with the PIC. That's just what I said. You are the sole authority and responsible person for operations of the VO. The PIC will identify the location from which the observer will perform his or her duties. And here's a hot topic right now. Daisy chaining of observers to increase operational distance is not normally approved. However, a proponent may provide a safety case for daisy chaining by demonstrating an acceptable level of risk to the NAS. Daisy chaining aviation jargon is when you have one visual observer and then another one distant, another one distant. You may be able to make a case for that, but you're going to have full duplex communications, not the public safety radio. Okay, there's no perfect VO training, and here's why. The FAA does not approve any VO classes. The only FAA approved classes are like the Part 107 class, or when you're taking your instrument or commercial tests that are authorized by the FAA. They don't even authorize the class, they authorize the test. So there's not a class in a box. There's not one thing that somebody can give you that is going to be, that you can rely on as being solely approved and that you can use for all situations. The responsible person is going to have to be responsible for the test and information that you give. For example, a VO night flight dark adaptation is impossible, but don't get lost in the weeds. Create a comprehensive class that covers the bases and then give your students a test to document their knowledge. And I fought testing for a long time. In the early days, it wasn't required at all, but now it can serve to cover your butt. The FAA also says that while you're giving testing, they don't give you a minimum grade that must be obtained, but for FAA tests, we know that the minimum grade is 70%, and I would stick with that for pass-fail for your test as well. You can keep testing simple and hand out a paper test with 10 questions on it, and then you can manually score it and keep the results. And like I said before, at the end of the class, I'm going to give you a link. You're going to take an online test. So I'd love to give you a full visual observer course in a box that you can teach from, but there is no FAA written test for VOs. So whatever test that you give has to prove that in the event of an incident or an accident, your test will have to be adequate. I always hate that word. The FAA uses the word adequate, and may not be reckless. Otherwise, it won't count for anything. So you want to make sure that your students have grasped the information and have demonstrated their knowledge of it. And by demonstrating, you can take them outside the station and you can put a drone up and you can say to somebody, you know, what are the obstacles here that you see? Point them out to me. It doesn't have to be anything long or complex, just that they have demonstrated the capabilities. So we got a download here. Sergeant Wigginton recently took this class and wrote his test and gave his class for his police department. And he wrote out this nice lesson plan. And he also gave me permission to give people his test and the answer key that you can use to give your test. So Pam is posting that right now.
Isn't that it? 7?
7. No, what is 7?
That's the train the trainer additional notes and references.
Let me see
Is
here.
it the class example?
Yeah, class example.
All right, that's number 8.
Oh, okay. 7 known as 8, apparently.
I'll get rid of that last one.
So here's the most important tip for you is to look, don't overcomplicate this. You don't have to fill your class with so much archaic material that people are just going to go numb. You just need to cover it with the basics. The FAA wants to see you've covered the basic stuff. You don't have to give a PhD class. You know, the old KISS rule, keep it simple. And I always like to tell students about legal protection, especially if you're going to be the responsible person for giving your class. I am the biggest proponent. The AOPA, Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association, offers a pilot protection plan, and they offer 2 levels, the plus level and the basic level. If you're a COA pilot, you're not eligible for any legal protection. If you're a Part 107 pilot, you are eligible for the plus level package, and they are wonderful. You have a staff aviation attorney that you can call and ask questions. I can't recommend it enough. It's the biggest deal of the century as far as I'm concerned. My experience using it, I was in the airplane and we were flying. Pam and I were flying.
Yes.
Yeah, 10,000 feet and lost all oil pressure. Had to declare an emergency, and obviously we had a safe landing, but I got a nice visit from the FAA the next day. And luckily, because I had this service, I could call and speak to an aviation attorney and be prepared for what to expect, and they helped walk me through it. So kudos to AOPA. The North Carolina Public Safety Continuing Education Credit is available through this link. Pam is posting that right now, psflight.org/CE, and that's a PDF form that you'll fill out, and it will go into the Montgomery Community College, where your continuing credits will be issued through.
You missed a
What did I miss?
train the trainer additional notes and reference material.
Okay, well, let's post that.
Okay.
I think you already sent that link.
I get rid of it.
Okay, so we have another file for you. It's just basically my notes from conducting this class before, and it has a bunch of links and information. Copy all that stuff. Okay, you're coming up with how to take your test. I do want to send you another poll here about feedback on topics you'd like to see. And this is always a 3-step click thing for me. Topics you'd like to see, go to the polls tab, vote for something. And if there are any more questions before you take your test, here's what I want you to know. I am always available to you. This is my email address. Make sure you whitelist my email address in your email program so that I don't wind up in your spam and trash folder. sroad@wakeforestfire.com. And I see we got a question there.
Lewis.
Let me, and while we're doing that, I am adding the last poll here, which is published poll. On a scale of 1 to 10, tell me how badly I sucked at this class. No, just give me some feedback if you liked it or not. I really try to focus on keeping these online webinars shorter than an hour, and you'll notice I kind of move steadily through the information. None of us like to be droned on, pun intended, and do some horrible webinar. So I am always here for you. We've given you lots of information and downloads. You please go give me some feedback in the tab about how you thought the class went.
We have 2 questions.
And we have 2 questions here.
One's from Chris.
Chris says, great job so far, Steve. Thanks for the optimism. Quick question. I heard comms need to be full duplex as well, so I brought it up with our agency's counsel. She said that as long as the law is written, our two-way radios suffice. So we use those. Do you have something that I can bring back to her? Yes, I just had this. Chris, shoot me an email, sroad@wakeforestfire.com. And if you can just copy and paste that question. I just had this discussion the other day with another department, and the FAA has a document that does mention full duplex communications as two-way radio communications. All right. So Lewis says 107.3, the regulation states efficient, not duplex. Is this coming directly from the FAA? Yes. You'll see that it says two-way radio communications. The FAA is all about it has to be two-way radio communications at the same time. So you can call it whatever you want, but you have to be able to speak and hear at the same time. All right, it's time to take the test. All right, there's the link to it. So go over there, copy and paste that link, go take your test, and you'll be able to download that snazzy certificate. All of you should be now on the email list to be notified of upcoming classes. The next class that we have is, that's actually tomorrow, but that's full. That's Aviation Radio Communications for the Public Safety Pilot. And then if any of you are in law enforcement, coming up on the 24th, Master State Trooper Brian Leventhal from the North Carolina State Highway Patrol is teaching crash reconstruction with drones for law enforcement.
Let them know that they can retake the test.
Oh, yeah. And last thing is on April 16th at 1 p.m. Eastern Time, I'll be doing a hangar time thing where people can come in and I can invite you on the stage here and ask questions. We can have a conversation, and you can ask everything that you want. How many times you can take the test? You can, if you failed the test, you can take the test over again. I think you've got 10 attempts. If it shows you what you got wrong, I mean, listen, come on.
I passed it.
Pam said she passed it.
Second.
So you should be able to breeze right through that. If there are no more questions, I am going to say goodbye and let's move on and do something else today. All right. Thank you very much. See you next time.